A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, Corn, I was walking through the old city yesterday, just wandering near the base of the northern wall, and I found myself staring at the masonry. I was tracing the lines in the limestone, and for a split second, my brain just locked onto a specific arrangement of pits and grooves. I thought I saw a sequence of letters, almost like a hidden message carved into the stone centuries ago that everyone else had somehow missed. It turned out to be just natural weathering and a bit of lichen, of course, but that tiny moment of cognitive friction, that sudden sharp jolt of excitement that I had found a secret, it really stayed with me all evening.
That is the perfect way to start today, Herman. Truly. I am Corn, he is Herman Poppleberry, and you have just described what might be the most fundamental drive in the human brain. We are quite literally biological pattern recognition machines. If our ancestors did not see the pattern of a predator's stripes in the tall grass, or the subtle shift in the clouds that signaled a coming storm, they did not survive to become our ancestors. We are the descendants of the paranoid and the observant, but today, that same survival mechanism is misfiring in a world saturated with more information than any human was ever designed to process.
It is the paradox of pattern finding. We are using ancient Pleistocene-era hardware to navigate a digital landscape that moves at light speed. And that is exactly what our housemate Daniel was getting at when he sent us this prompt. He wanted us to look into the history and the deep-seated psychology of conspiracy theories, not just the headline-grabbing ones we see on the news every night, but the actual mechanics of why the human mind is so vulnerable to them. Why does a rational person look at a random event and see a master plan?
It is a massive topic, and honestly, it is one of the most misunderstood aspects of human behavior. People tend to write off conspiracy believers as either being outside the mainstream, perhaps uneducated, or suffering from some kind of clinical cognitive break. But the research suggests something much more universal and, frankly, much more unsettling. We are talking about a fundamental need for meaning in a world that often feels chaotic, indifferent, and increasingly opaque.
Right. And before we dive into the weeds, I think we should establish that this isn't just a modern internet problem. We often talk about social media algorithms as the primary culprit, and we have discussed that back in episode 593 when we looked at digital deception, but the roots go back thousands of years. Long before there was a Twitter or a TikTok, people were scratching conspiracy theories into Roman walls with iron styluses.
If you look at ancient Rome, you find graffiti that looks remarkably like a modern viral thread. There was early viral misinformation about the Great Fire of Rome in 64 Anno Domini. While the city was still smoldering, rumors were flying that Nero himself had ordered the fire to clear land for his golden house. Then you have the accusations against early Christians, which were documented by the theologian Tertullian. He wrote extensively about how Christians were accused of ritual murder and other heinous acts in secret meetings. These were not just idle rumors. They were structured narratives designed to explain social upheaval by pointing to a hidden, malevolent group. It is the exact same template we see today.
It is fascinating how the template stays the same even as the technology changes from stone to silicon. You mentioned the ritual murder accusations that leads us directly to one of the most persistent and destructive templates in history, which is the blood libel. This is where the conspiracy theory stops being a psychological curiosity and starts becoming a weapon of mass destruction.
That is a dark but necessary place to start our deep dive. If you want to understand the modern conspiracy mindset, you have to look at the death of William of Norwich in 1144. This was a young boy found dead in the woods in England. There was no evidence of a crime, let alone a ritualistic one, but a monk named Thomas of Monmouth fabricated a narrative in his book, The Life and Passion of St. William of Norwich. He claimed a secret council of Jews had kidnapped and murdered the boy as part of a ritual. It was a complete fabrication, but it provided a target for the community's grief and fear.
And that narrative did not stay in the 12th century. It was recycled, refined, and weaponized for over 900 years. It was used by King Philip IV of France in 1307 when he wanted to destroy the Knights Templar. He was deeply in debt to them and wanted to seize their massive assets, so he used the same kind of secret, ritualistic treachery accusations. He claimed they were spitting on the cross and worshipping idols in the dark. It was a masterclass in state-sponsored disinformation. He realized that if you create a narrative that is shocking enough, the burden of proof shifts entirely.
It really does. Philip IV realized a fundamental truth of human psychology. The accused have to prove a negative, which is logically impossible. How do you prove you didn't have a secret meeting? And we see that same blood libel template evolving into modern tropes like Pizzagate or certain branches of QAnon. The details change. Instead of a 12th century village or a medieval monastery, it is a basement of a pizza parlor or a secret underground bunker. But the underlying psychological architecture is identical. It is always about a hidden elite harming the innocent in secret.
So, if the architecture is identical across nearly a millennium, we have to ask why. Why does this specific story resonate so deeply across cultures and centuries? Is it just that it is a good story in a narrative sense? Or is there something happening in the physical structure of the brain that makes us want to believe it?
There is definitely something happening in the brain, and the research from 23 through 26 has been groundbreaking here. There was a study out of Flinders University just last month, in February 2026, that looked at what they call systemizers. These are people who have a high drive to understand and build systems, to find the underlying rules of how things work. They are the people who want to know exactly how the clock functions, not just what time it is.
That sounds like a positive trait, though. I mean, scientists, engineers, and even podcast editors are systemizers, right? We want to see the structure.
Usually, yes, it is a massive advantage. But the Flinders research suggests that when systemizers are faced with randomness or a lack of control, they lean into structured narratives to cope. If you are a systemizer and you see a chaotic event, like a global pandemic, a sudden economic collapse, or a confusing political shift, the idea that it was a random, senseless tragedy is actually more terrifying than the idea that it was a planned conspiracy. If it is random, you are helpless. If it is a conspiracy, there is a logic to it.
I see. Because if it is a conspiracy, then at least someone is in charge. Even if they are evil, there is a steering wheel on the bus. There is a system you can study, a map you could draw, and potentially a villain you can defeat. Randomness is much harder to process because there is no why to solve.
Precisely. It is about agency. This ties into what the psychologist Karen Douglas identifies as the three core motives for conspiracy belief. First, you have the epistemic motive, which is the desire for certainty and understanding. We hate the "I don't know" answer. Second, you have the existential motive, which is the need to feel safe and in control of your environment. And finally, the social motive, which is the desire to maintain a positive image of yourself and your group.
The social motive is particularly interesting to me because it explains why these theories act as social glue. We talked about this in episode 750 when we explored the architecture of the other and why humans divide themselves into tribes. A conspiracy theory creates an instant in-group. You are the one who knows the truth, while everyone else is a sheep or asleep. That is a very powerful social drug. It provides a sense of superiority and belonging simultaneously.
It is, and it creates these fascinating internal hierarchies. If you look at the landscape of modern movements, there is this sociological paradox. For example, many followers of QAnon will go to great lengths to distance themselves from flat earthers. They establish their own internal credibility standards. They will say, "Oh, we are doing real research into the deep state and international finance. We are not crazy like those people who think the world is flat." It is a way of creating status within a countercultural movement. Even among the outsiders, people are desperate to feel like they are the rational ones.
It is like they are competing for who has the most sophisticated version of the secret knowledge. But Korn, I want to go back to the brain for a second. You mentioned some neural correlates in the research from the last few years. What is actually happening in the gray matter when someone falls down these rabbit holes? Is there a physical marker for this?
This is where it gets really technical and honestly pretty cool. Studies between 2023 and 2025 have been using electroencephalography to look at something called beta oscillatory activity. They found that individuals who are more prone to conspiratorial thinking tend to have reduced beta activity in certain regions of the brain, particularly in the areas associated with top-down processing.
And for those of us who aren't neuroscientists, what does beta activity normally do in a healthy brain?
It is basically your brain's ability to use what it already knows, your internal model of the world, to filter out noise. It is the editor of your sensory input. When that activity is reduced, your brain's pattern recognition system goes into overdrive. You stop filtering. You start seeing connections in everything because the noise is being treated as signal. It is a state called apophenia. That is spelled A-P-O-P-H-E-N-I-A. It is the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things.
So, it is like the gain on the pattern recognition dial is turned up to 11. You are not just seeing the tiger in the grass, you are seeing the tiger in the clouds, in the static on the television, and in the way your neighbor parks their car. Everything becomes a sign.
And when you combine that overactive pattern matching with high levels of anxiety or a feeling of being on the losing side of political or social events, you have the perfect storm. The research shows that conspiracy belief correlates very strongly with low social status or feeling disenfranchised. If the system is not working for you, you are much more likely to believe the system is rigged by a secret cabal. It is a way of rationalizing why things are not going your way without having to blame yourself or accept that the world is just unfair.
That makes a lot of sense. It is a defense mechanism. But we have to be careful here, right? Because as we know, some conspiracies are real. We have talked about COINTELPRO and MKUltra before. Those were actual, documented government programs that sounded like wild conspiracy theories until the evidence came out. How do we distinguish between healthy, necessary skepticism of power and this kind of runaway conspiratorial ideation?
That is the million-dollar question, Herman, and it is where most people get tripped up. The difference usually lies in the nature of the evidence and the flexibility of the narrative. In a real conspiracy, like the Tuskegee syphilis study or the Iran-Contra affair, the goal of the investigation is to find evidence that can be falsified. You look for documents, witnesses, and physical proof. If the evidence points away from a conspiracy, a healthy skeptic changes their mind. They follow the data, even if it's boring.
Whereas in conspiratorial ideation, the lack of evidence is often seen as proof of how good the cover-up is. It is a heads I win, tails you lose scenario.
It becomes a self-sealing narrative. If the media ignores the story, they are part of the cover-up. If the media debunks the story, they are spreading disinformation to protect the elites. Every piece of information, no matter how contradictory, is absorbed into the theory. It is the difference between demanding evidence and demanding a specific narrative. One is a search for truth, the other is a search for confirmation.
It seems like the speed of modern information has made this much worse. You mentioned the medieval rumors earlier. Back then, a rumor about William of Norwich might take decades to travel across Europe by horse and boat. Today, a theory can go from a niche forum to millions of screens in minutes.
The scale is unprecedented, and it is not just the speed, it is the algorithmic amplification. We know that high arousal content, things that make us angry, outraged, or scared, gets more engagement. Conspiracy theories are high arousal by design. They are built to trigger that epistemic and existential anxiety we talked about, so the platforms naturally push them to the top of the feed because they keep people clicking. We are being fed a diet of digital adrenaline.
And then you have the evolution of these movements. Look at QAnon Post, January 6th, 2021. It did not just disappear when the predicted events failed to happen. It morphed. It became part of the mainstream political rhetoric. It moved from the fringes into the way people talk about election integrity or public health policy. It is like a virus that keeps mutating to stay ahead of the immune system. It adapts to the new environment to survive.
That is a great analogy. And the immune system, in this case, is our collective sense of shared reality. When a significant portion of the population starts operating on a completely different set of facts, the social glue that holds a republic together starts to dissolve. This is something we have to take seriously, not just as a psychological quirk or a funny internet subculture, but as a geopolitical challenge. If we can't agree on what is real, we can't solve actual problems.
It really is a challenge to our worldview, especially as people who value skepticism of big government and centralized power. There is a long history of government overreach that justifies a certain level of wariness. But we have to be able to distinguish between legitimate oversight and these wild, evidence-free narratives that actually undermine our ability to hold power accountable. If everything is a conspiracy, then nothing is.
I totally agree. If we are chasing shadows and secret cabals of lizard people, we are missing the very real, very transparent ways that policy and power are being used in ways we might disagree with. It is a distraction. It is like being so focused on a ghost in the attic that you don't notice the front door is wide open and the house is being robbed in broad daylight.
So, let's talk about the practical side of this. If someone is listening to this and they realize they might be prone to this kind of thinking, or they have a friend or family member who is deep in a rabbit hole, what can they actually do? How do we retrain our brains to value truth over the comfort of a narrative?
The first step is awareness of those three motives Karen Douglas identified. When you feel that surge of excitement from a new theory, that jolt you felt at the wall, ask yourself, am I looking for this because I feel out of control in my personal life? Am I seeking this out because I want to feel like I belong to a special group? Just naming the motive can take some of the emotional power out of the pattern.
I think slowing down is huge too. Our pattern matching response is instantaneous. It is that prehistoric jolt. But our analytical, logical brain, the prefrontal cortex, is slower. It takes more energy to run. If you encounter a piece of high arousal information, give yourself 24 hours before you share it or incorporate it into your worldview. Let the beta activity in your brain catch up and start filtering the noise.
That is excellent advice. Another practical takeaway is to diversify your information diet, but in a specific way. Don't just look at people you disagree with. Look at how different groups process the same set of facts. Notice the patterns in how narratives are constructed. Once you see the template, the secret elite, the innocent victims, the hidden signs, the only I can tell you the truth, hero, it becomes much easier to spot when it is being used to manipulate you.
It is about developing a kind of epistemic humility, admitting that the world is often random, messy, and complicated, and that no one, not even a secret cabal, has total control over it. That is a scary thought, that no one is at the wheel, but it is also a liberating one because it allows you to focus on what you actually can control.
It really is. And as we look toward the future, especially with the rise of AI-generated synthetic reality here in 2026, this is only going to get harder. We are entering an era where you can't even trust your own eyes and ears when looking at a video or listening to a recording. If we don't have a solid psychological foundation for how we determine truth, we are going to be completely lost in a sea of hallucinations.
That brings us back to the responsibility of the individual. In an era of information overload, you are your own editor. You are your own fact checker. You have to be more disciplined than ever before. We can't rely on the algorithms to protect us. In fact, they are often doing the opposite because their goal is engagement, not accuracy.
We have to program our own brains to value the process of discovery over the satisfaction of the answer. Truth is a journey, not a destination you reach by reading one secret document on a fringe website. It requires constant maintenance and a willingness to be wrong.
This has been a deep one, Corn. I think we have covered everything from 12th century monks to 2026 brain research. It really shows that while the stories change from ritual murders to deep state bunkers, the human heart and the human brain stay the same. We are all just looking for patterns in the stone, trying to make sense of the silence.
We really are. And I hope this gives people some tools to look at those patterns a little more critically. It is okay to be a systemizer. Just make sure the system you are building is grounded in reality, not just in your own anxieties.
Well said. And hey, if you have been finding value in these deep dives, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It genuinely helps the show reach more people and keeps the conversation going.
It really does. You can find all of our past episodes and ways to subscribe at myweirdprompts.com. We have a full RSS feed there, and if you are on Telegram, just search for My Weird Prompts to get notified every time a new episode drops.
Thanks to Daniel for the prompt that got us thinking about this. It is definitely going to change how I look at those old city walls next time I go for a walk. I'll be looking for the lichen, not the letters.
Just remember, Herman, sometimes a weathered stone is just a weathered stone.
I will try to keep that in mind. Thanks for listening to My Weird Props. We will see you in the next one.
Take care, everyone.
You know, Corn, I was thinking about that Knights Templar example you brought up. It is such a perfect illustration of how power uses conspiracy to consolidate itself. King Philip IV didn't just want the money, he wanted to destroy a rival power structure that he couldn't control. By framing them as heretics and conspirators, he made it impossible for anyone to defend them without looking like a traitor themselves. It was a political trap.
It is the ultimate political weapon because it bypasses the legal system and goes straight to the gut. If you can make people feel a sense of moral outrage, especially about children or secret rituals, they will let you get away with almost anything. We see that throughout history. The French Revolution was fueled by conspiracy theories about the Queen, Marie Antoinette, and her supposed plots against the people. Some of it was based on real grievances, but the narratives that drove the violence were often pure fiction.
It reminds me of what we discussed in episode 8 and 16 about the evolution of human order. We have this inherent obsession with creating schemas and lists to make sense of the world. But when those schemas become untethered from reality, they become dangerous. It is like building a map of a city that doesn't exist and then trying to drive through it at 60 miles per hour. You are going to crash.
That is a great way to put it. And the crash usually happens when the conspiracy theory hits the real world. We saw that on January 6th, and we see it in the way public health crises are handled. When the map doesn't match the terrain, people get hurt because they are reacting to a world that isn't there.
I also think about the role of technology in all of this. We talked about AI scaling digital deception in episode 593, and as we sit here in March of 2026, that feels more relevant than ever. If an AI can generate 100,000 unique conspiracy theories in an afternoon, each tailored to a specific person's psychological profile and their specific fears, how does a human brain even stand a chance?
It is a terrifying prospect, but it also makes the cognitive tools we talked about today even more essential. We have to move away from trusting content based on how it makes us feel, that jolt of excitement, and start trusting the process of how information is verified. We need a new kind of digital literacy that isn't just about spotting fake news, but about understanding our own cognitive biases. We need to know our own bugs.
It is almost like we need a manual for our own brains. We are born with this incredible computer between our ears, but we never get taught how the software actually works, or how it can be hacked by a clever algorithm or a manipulative leader.
That is exactly what we are trying to do here, Herman. One episode at a time. We are looking at the source code of human behavior to see why we do the things we do.
And sometimes the source code has some pretty weird bugs in it.
Bugs that were once features. That is the key. The pattern matching was a feature in the savannah when you needed to find food and avoid being eaten. It is only a bug when you are browsing the internet at 2 in the morning and your brain starts connecting dots that aren't there.
Fair point. I think I'm going to stay off the internet for at least a few hours after this. Maybe just go look at some more rocks and remind myself that they are just rocks.
Just rocks, Herman. No secret messages from the Templars.
I'll do my best. This has been My Weird Prompts, episode 1129. Thanks for sticking with us through the deep history and the neural oscillations. It is a lot to process, but that is why we are here.
If you want to dive deeper into any of the studies we mentioned, like the Flinders University research or the beta activity papers, head over to the website. We try to keep the archive searchable so you can connect the dots between these topics in a way that is actually grounded in science. MyWeirdPrompts.com is the place to be.
And if you are enjoying the brotherly dynamic, tell a friend. Word of mouth is still the best way for a show like ours to grow in an age of algorithmic noise.
Until next time, keep your eyes open, but your filters on.
Well said. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
You know, I actually have one more thought before we wrap. We talked about the blood libel in the Templars, But what about the more modern stuff, like the evolution of the UFO phenomenon? That seems to follow a similar psychological path, but with a more technological skin.
Oh, absolutely. The UFO narrative is a perfect example of the epistemic motive. In the 1950s, it was about Cold War anxiety and the fear of nuclear technology. Today, it has shifted more toward a distrust of government transparency. The UAP rebranding we have seen over the last few years is a fascinating case of a conspiracy-adjacent topic moving into the mainstream through official channels. It shows how the secret knowledge can eventually become official knowledge if enough pressure is applied.
It is that same pattern finding. People see a blurred shape on a radar screen, and their brain fills in the rest of the system. It is not just a sensor glitch, it is a transmedium craft from another dimension. We want the mystery to have a grand explanation because the alternative, that our sensors are just imperfect and we don't know everything, is less exciting. We prefer a scary story to a boring one.
It goes back to that systemizing drive. We want a unified theory of everything, even if that theory is that we are being visited by aliens. It provides a sense of wonder and a sense of place in the universe, even if it is a scary one. It makes the universe feel populated rather than empty and random.
It is all connected, isn't it? The brain just hates a vacuum. It will fill a void with anything it can find, whether it is a ritual murder charge in the 1200s or a tic-tac shaped craft in the 2020s.
Nature abhors a vacuum, and the human mind abhors randomness. If we can remember that, we are halfway to staying grounded in the real world.
All right, now I am really done. For real this time.
I believe you, Herman. Let's go look at some rocks.
Sounds like a plan. This has been My Weird Prompts. We will see you next time.
See you then.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from sloth